I think one can agree with the project of lessening European cultural arrogance completely, and that we applaud all efforts to do so. What we are concerned with is trying to establish what historical evidence shows the influence of what on what. And this is not a project which any of us here can complete at all. That many people must be involved in this, and it requires the thought and efforts of a lot of us to do it. We would like to think that it can be redone without rewriting history altogether, or without claiming that there has been a huge European cover-up of information. There is certainly true. You can claim that, but please remember, you must also show that it has been done. There are many things that Europe has been guilty of and responsible for, and certainly the covering, not the covering up, I don't mean to say that, but the absolute refusal to acknowledge the history of Afrika, which I made reference to in my opening remarks, is something that we must continuously work on redressing. Much more must be learned, much more must be studied. I am very much in favor of that, and I believe that can start also in our teaching of American history, where in many cases the whole history of the African American contribution to American history has been ignored and neglected, and there are brilliant writers out there whose works are not being read. I think we should change all that. But we do not have to rewrite ancient history completely in order to do some of these important things. I would just simply ask, let us investigate carefully the degree of Egyptian influence on ancient Greece, but we must also investigate the Near Eastern cultures such as Phoenicia and the Hittites. After all, Phoenicia gave ancient Greece her alphabet. They didn't learn the alphabet from the Egyptians. It was too hard. It was easier to get it from the Phoenicians. And we must begin to work on those lines. I would like to see everyone work also on a period we haven't discussed much here tonight, where we really do see Egyptian influence on Greek culture, and that is in the Hellenistic period after Alexander got there and Greeks were living in Egypt. A huge number of Greeks were living in Egypt. There, I think you can see some real influence.
This is now the third debate that we have had, and I'm very struck by what I see as a discrepancy between Mary Lefkowitz's speech and her writing. That in speech, she is all sweetness and light and for open debate and openness in culture. Her writing is very different. The title, Not Out of Africa, is extremely provocative, and it reads, the text carries on in the same way. And I'd like to quote to you a letter I received from probably the most distinguished active classicist in the world today, who actually agrees with her on the academic side. Nevertheless, he writes, "I do not find her exposition cool, detached, and reasonable, despite her efforts to make it seem like that. It is, in fact, as I wrote in my review, an impassioned polemic. Of course, Mary wants to look scholarly and detached, but hers is the scholarship of the National Association of Scholars, which is funded by the same people that funded Not Out of Africa, and that leads us back to where Professor Clarke began on the general political context in which this book has appeared."
I will defend Professor Lefkowitz's innocence because she is a pawn in somebody else's game. As I said in the beginning, it is beyond the lack and dislike of Afrocentricity, which has not even developed enough to be called a discipline. It It is a world war to prepare the mind to accept the re-enslavement of Africa, to remove from the mind of all people anything good that the African has done, and to ignore the fact that Europe set up Africa to fall apart by imposing on Africa, through miseducated Africans, a nation state. The nation state is un-African. The African thrived at his best in the territorial state. Many cultures, many languages, side by side, challenging each other, fertilizing each other. What you might call an empire, if you study the last 1,000 years before slavery, the development of independent states in the Western Sudan, Ghana, Mali, Sangay, destroyed by the invasion from North Africa by the Arabs attacking the North African Muslims, attacking the African Muslims, and destroying the great university of Sankore and exiling its greatest scholar, Ahmed Baba, who admonished his students, believe in God and science. The Africans never separated God from science. The priest was scientists. The priest was the most knowledgeable person. That's why you had the concept of a priest god. Now, if they wipe this out of the mind of our children, and our children look at television and sound bites and think they were nothing but a nothing, when they re-enslave Africa, they're going to say, good Father. They're preparing us to accept it. They're preparing the world to accept the re-enslavement of African people all over the world. And I'm saying that Ms. Lefkowitz is a pawn in their game, in the tragic irony of it. She is the pawn in the game of people who turn their backs on her people and let them be killed by the millions. American intelligence, French intelligence, British intelligence, the intelligence of the Western world knew exactly what was happening to the Jews in Germany. We raised our voice against this in the old Harlem History Club, 1939 to the death of the leader in 1941. If you think that, if we get into the nonsense about black anti-Semitism, blacks have always had a sentimental attachment to the Jews. They actually believe the Bible. You know, we are the true believers. We out Pope the Pope. We out Muhammad. But religion has always been a political thing to Europeans and still is. And when it no longer serves them politically, they're going to discard it. They turn their backs and let this happen. Now they're creating a new game because Europe has spoiled Europe. They want to take some geography outside of Europe. They say the people they're going to take the geography from are unworthy. They can't rule themselves. Of course, they cannot rule themselves in artificial states set up by the Europeans. The first place that Africa has to do is to get rid of these borders. Reestablish the borders along the old lines and integrate Africans into Africans.